Everybody, welcome to another Rackspace Office Hours podcast. I'm Alan Bush, and we are broadcasting live from the castle today, Rackspace's headquarters here in San Antonio, Texas. Joining us as usual is Drew. That's not Drew Cox. Wait a minute. This is Robert Chapa. He's joining us again. This is the second time on the show in a couple of weeks. Drew's right over there, joining us from remotely here in the castle. How you doing, Drew?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Not too shabby, not too shabby. Yeah, so I already
No.
mentioned Robert's here with us. We got a chance to interview Robert in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know about you, Drew, but I thought it was a great presentation, and it was a lot of really interesting stuff that he presented at the FutureStack Summit in San Francisco, and so we wanted to bring you on, Robert, to talk to us a little bit more in depth about it. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you. We're going to jump right into that here in a little bit and let you kind of go back through this entire process because you had a lot of really interesting stuff about the way that you were using New Relic Insights for finding some ways to improve our business processes. So we'll jump into that here in just a minute. Drew, what else can we talk about here before we jump on? Can you tell everybody how to participate if they're available?
Absolutely. So the conversation is going to be ongoing on Twitter. We've got everybody's handles down here below where we're at. So go ahead and use the hashtag CloudQA or just shout out to us directly via our Twitter handles. We've got a couple of other ways to interact as well. If you're watching on YouTube or you're watching on Google+, the comment section or the Q&A app would work just fine. And then let us know specific questions. We're always looking for feedback broadly, but while we've got the experts here in the room, throw questions Robert's way on how he used New Relic Insights and our way on how we solve problems with the tooling in the ecosystem. So those are all good ways to reach out to us, but I'm going to step out of the way. And I'm excited to share what Robert has worked on here with this talk because I think it was one of the highlights of FutureStack a couple weeks back.
Take it away, Robert.
I appreciate it. So, at FutureStack, I was asked to give a talk. Essentially, it started when we were talking with our New Relic vendors about how we were using New Relic Insights, and they kind of looked at us and said, okay, you're using it in kind of a unique way. Like we actually don't have people using it that way. Would you want to come to us and talk at FutureStack about how you're using it? So I put together just a quick 20-minute presentation about the unique way that our team is using it and some of the interesting things we've been able to find using this tool. And so I could jump right in. Is it sharing? I'm not sure how it.
Let's actually start with a little bit of what Insights is. I think using it elegantly
Yes.
Is definitely where we're headed. But let's level set with explanation.
Yeah. So New Relic Insights. I actually have the first slide kind of sets up as to what New Relic Insights and how it's used.
Tyler, if you can share that. All right. So we'll go ahead and.
Okay, there we go. So New Relic Insights, kind of, you can see here, data visualization. It's essentially New Relic's data visualization tool. So they have monitoring agents. Their main chunk of business is their monitoring agents. APM is like their flagship product, and then they have, browser agents, synthetic transaction agents, and all of these monitoring agents produce a ton of data. And no one's going to read through these logs. I mean, if anyone's ever looked at like event logs or anything, it's impossible to find anything. So they created New Relic Insights, which was their data visualization tool that allows you to put that data together visually and actually see what's going on. So on our team, when we were introduced to it, the agents didn't give us the data we were looking for, more because on our team, we're using an application that was written by a separate team at Rackspace. So we didn't own the application, we didn't own the website, we didn't own any of those places where we could put these monitoring agents, but we still wanted to look at our data on how our processes were doing. So we found that New Relic, we couldn't use those agents, so we found that New Relic Insights allowed us to send up data via a custom events API. So we were able to just send, treat it, on the back end they have this NRDB, it's a New Relic database, and we were able to just send up data into the New Relic database and then analyze it through New Relic Insights. And it's a product that it's something that they supported, but they didn't expect someone to do 100% custom events. Like they thought you were going to decorate your existing events with a little bit more data, and we're like, no, we're just doing 100% custom events. And it was just kind of neat. So let me step back. Oh, were you?
No, I think that's great. I mean, so this is something that New Relic has a lot of plugins where you can put a lot of data from their plugins directly into Insights, which, like you mentioned, is kind of the data visualization and kind of aggregator for all of this. But because they didn't have, our proprietary products did not have the correct plugins already built. Instead of building on new plugins or anything like that, you said, oh, hey, there's an API. We can pump this directly in.
Right. We could have integrated if I wanted to go to the devs and say, hey, can you put this into your code, and then wait like 2 weeks for their dev cycle and then go through their prioritization. Or I could say, you know what, I'll just go ahead and throw the data up ourselves, cut out the middleman and just do it ourselves.
Great. Sounds good.
Yeah, so if I can back up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm a process engineer, and essentially what I do is I build the automation that helps drive fanatical support. So every team out there, every person has some menial, repetitive, non-value-added task that they're constantly doing, and we'll find those tasks. Usually, they find us. The teams will come up and say, "We don't want to do this anymore. Please automate it." And so we find out what those people are doing, and we find out all the human-machine interactions, right? So I type in a device number here, and then it gives me some information. So then I go to this system and I type something else in, and so we map out those interactions, and we find APIs that do those. And what we'll do is we'll actually string those together using a tool written in-house into an automated API workflow. And so we'll free up the rackers to do the higher value-added tasks, something that actually needs a human to do. And we'll create a repeatable process using those APIs. Well, sometimes in the process, we have branches. You could, let's say if it's a network device, you want to do this over here, but if it's a server, you want to go do this branch over here. And we wanted to know, well, how many times is it doing server versus network device? How many times is it succeeding versus failing, and things like that. And so what we did is that's when we got the New Relic API, and just the very last thing, since we're linking all these APIs together, the last thing is an API called a New Relic dumping all our data there, and we're able to just view that visually and see how all our processes are doing.
Great.
Yeah, and this is, if you look at the next slide, this right here is one ugly instance of SQL that my life was when I first moved onto this team. I was a data analyst for 2 years before I moved into this role, and I came into a role. Automation had been going on for a while, and my boss is like, "Hey, you're a data analyst. Figure out how things are going." So it's like, okay. So I talked to the devs, and I got access to the back-end SQL, and it was horrible. Like there was nothing nice and neat that I could just write on. I couldn't use like process names. I had to find what their unique identifier was. It was just bad news all over. And so, I'm writing all this SQL, and then everyone on my team is like, hey, you're finding out how your processes are doing. How about how our processes are doing? So I'm now, the data analyst for the team, and I'm spending 50% of my time just doing everyone's analysis and not what I got hired to do. I left being a data analyst to come automate processes. Now I'm automating data analysis. So I'd say, I think it was about a year ago, our boss David Mills had come from a meeting with New Relic. It was a demo, and so we actually had hired a data analyst to take this on so I could go back to doing my day job. And so he comes up and he goes to me and my data analyst and says, hey, there's this new tool, New Relic Insights. They showed him all the graphs and the charts, and bosses love graphs and charts.
They do.
And so he said, we should start using this. And we told him, well, we can't. We'd have to go to the team that builds that builds the tool and get them to rewrite their code and all this other stuff. And he said, no, they have this events API. And as soon as he said API, we're like, oh, you can send data via API. We use APIs. Let's do that. And so we tested it out. We sent a couple events up there, and we built some dashboards. It was kind of neat. And then we're like, okay, well, we have a process that rotates out passwords, and every time a racker views a password, we'll change it, after a while, so that we keep it secure.
Right.
And it runs quite often. And so we said, let's build it into that process and just see live data. So we built it into the process, started sending data, and within 10 minutes, we already had quite a bit of data that we could build into dashboards. We built some dashboards, and it was like, hey, we got something here. Like, this is kind of neat. And we noticed the Apple thing. You can download an Apple app, so we're like, let's download that. My boss is a huge Mac guy, And so we downloaded that, and we're like, we're gonna build the dashboards on the iPhone app, and we'll be able to show them to them. But when we logged in, everything we had built on the website was already on the iPhone app. And so we're like, it's there.
So he didn't have anything. You didn't have anything to tell him. He already knew it all.
Well, no, like so he hadn't seen that yet.
Oh,
so
okay, great.
that was the fun part. So we went up to my boss and we're like, hey, download the app. He's like, okay, I'll download the app right now. Log in. He's like, okay, I'm logging in. And he stares at it and he's like, so what is this? And his eyes get kind of wide because he thinks he knows what it is, but he doesn't know what it is. And it's like, that's your password rotation process. That's live data, like self-updating and all this other stuff. And he was blown away. Yeah, he had it in his hand, dashboard and all this stuff, but he had just given us the test license like 10 minutes before. Yeah, it was like 15 minutes, but he had just given us a license, and we already have an iPhone app in his hand that he can see as live data. And so, I mean, he was blown away. We were happy at the ease of use. I was happy I didn't have to write this horrible SQL. And that horrible SQL there that you're looking at was replaced by this line of NRQL as they call it, the New Relic query language. So yeah, that was our
That's
first
one line,
taste
right?
of it, right? One line, yeah. So it's just a time series. It let us know. Before I had to write all these pivots, and I said, okay, take all these events between 10 and 15 minutes,
Right.
and then 15 and 20, and here it just says show it to me by hour, and it slices it up for you.
That's very nice. So you see, so this is the actual live. Well, at one point in time, it was live of that data for the password rotation. Was there a reason that you chose the password rotation? Was it just something that was easily available and had a lot of?
Yeah.
data going through?
So our processes run. Some of them run daily. Some run weekly. This one runs, I mean, several times an hour. Several times a minute sometimes. So this one we knew had the most data, had the most events going through, and we knew it would be the shortest time to collect the data in the database.
Got it. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, Robert, let me just pause real quick here because I want to just welcome anybody that's just joined us. This is the Rackspace Office Hours Hangout. I'm Alan Bush along with our co-host Drew Cox in another room, and Robert Chapa here joining us live in the studio. We're talking about using New Relic Insights for business process improvement. And Robert's one of our senior process engineers. And he has been helping to improve a lot of these processes. So we're talking about that right now. But we talked about New Relic Insights a few weeks ago with the team from New Relic and got a lot of interesting information on how that works from them. But we wanted to take a look at a way that we're actually using that and dogfooding it here within Rackspace. So Robert's been walking us through this, and the presentation that you're seeing along with this, that is the way that that's actually the presentation that you gave at New Relic's conference called FutureStack just a couple of weeks ago, and it was a great presentation. And thus we said, hey, let's dive into this a little bit deeper. So that's exactly what we're doing here right now. And I want to mention that anybody that's watching, we'd encourage you to join us and join in on the conversation in a couple of different ways. Leave us a comment on YouTube or wherever you're watching, or you can use the hashtag CloudQA on Twitter, and we'll find all of that, and or just mention us directly. We've got our Twitter handles down there. You can mention us directly. We'd love to hear from you if you're watching live, and if you're watching in the future, still do the same thing. We'll still find it. So, all right. So with that, Robert, I will bring this back in for you.
Sure. So we're sending, we started integrating with all of our processes, and this was last November when we started our integration with our processes, and today we're running about, so let's see if I have it. Oh, perfect. I do have it highlighted here. So here you can see we have 70 unique processes that are logging here, and they range anywhere from provisioning. So when servers come online, we have all these automated processes that happen. Decommissioning, when they go offline, we have a lot of automated processes that happen. And everywhere in between. I mentioned password rotation. I'll mention a couple others that we're using it with, but essentially we have 70 unique processes that run. We're running about 800,000 executions every week, and that's about 100 to 150,000 executions every day. So you're looking at about 100 executions a minute through this system, and every single one of these process executions is logging its entire execution status and variables and everything straight to New Relic. And because we have all this amount of data, we're able to see so much more. And you can see one of the quotes at the top. It's one of my favorite things to say. So as a data analyst, I always hated the fact that I have this data set, and it's like I can make all these meaningful analytics, and then someone's like, okay, well, can I see that by data center? And you're like, yeah, my data set doesn't have data center in there. Let me start logging it now, and then in a week I can get you some of that. And so I always tell people, from my data analyst days and then now in my engineering process engineering phase, I always tell them, log everything you have. Even if you don't think it's important at the time, it doesn't hurt you to log it. And it's just easier for me to ignore it when I'm doing my analysis than it is for me to retroactively collect it. If you're sending data, just send absolutely everything. And then when someone comes and says, hey, can we get it by data center? You're like, yep, boop, done.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that's the thing. Tell us a little bit more about, you were mentioning the giant SQL queries that you're having to put together, where you're kind of segmenting it out by every 10-minute chunk.
Right.
So with that, you would have to go back and completely redo your SQL query, perhaps even reindex and everything like that.
Oh, yeah.
But with this, it's just adding in another filter or another, what's the New Relic term for that? Another parameter?
So yeah, so another facet. So yeah, the neat thing about that is I type in one word, which is the line I want to facet by or to group everything by, and it just adds it to there. It's just neat. It just automatically does it.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, so since we're sending up all this data, right? So I'm telling everyone log everything. If you're just changing a device password, I want to know, not the password, obviously, we're not logging that. But I want to know the device number. I want to know the account you did it for. I want to know what data center it was in. Any data you have at that time, even if we opted out, the status, substatus, anything. Then we can tell, hey, which data center do we have the most password rotations for? Is there one account that's having a ton of, password views, over another one? And we can kind of see all these meaningful things. And I highlight in the next couple of slides, I highlight 3 of the kind of the neatest things we found using the data like this. So the first one was we had like proactive prediction. So I've been here for quite a while. I started in support, and you always want to move away from firefighter mode. Oh, this is on fire, let me put it out. This is on fire, let me put it out. And you want to just be there before the fire starts. And because we were logging all sorts of data, we were able to see those issues before they became problems. And one of them had to do with our rebase in the rack process. So this has to do, or the rebase in the rack dashboard, which is based off of our rapid provisioning process. Right. So we have a product called rapid provisioning where whenever a customer wants servers, generally non-custom servers quickly, they can order these rapid provisioning servers, and instead of getting them in a couple of days or weeks, they get them in a couple hours. And the way we do that is we already have, so instead of a standard server, if you order it straight off the rack, we have to pull it from inventory. Data center tech has to configure it on his box, and he has to walk it into the data center. He has to rack it. You have to cable it all up. There's so much stuff involved with it, so it takes quite a while. And with rapid provisioning, we've already pulled it from inventory. We've already base configured it. We've already racked it. We've already cabled it. And all we do when a customer orders it is essentially we just reconfigure it to what they needed. We VLAN everything off so that their network is secure, and then we hand it over to them. And one of the processes that works on the back end for that is the rebase in the rack. And so what this one does is either when we get new inventory or when a customer churns their device, we rebase configure it. We clear out all of the data on there. We make sure that we clear out the VLANs. We basically reset it to where it's usable for another customer.
Great.
So when this fails, it's kind of expensive because we have data where we have hardware out there in our data center that's not provisionable, so it's basically not being used. And so we want to make sure that any failures get resolved rather quickly. And Dawn Eichmeyer is the process engineer that wrote this process, and she monitors it every day. She's kind of doing ops for it as well. And so she monitors her dashboard every day. And one day she was able to go in here. And the neat thing about the New Relic Insights dashboards is if I click on data center on the top left, so if we click on London in the data center, it reconfigures the entire dashboard to London. And so she configures that to London, and she goes through each of the cabinets. And when she gets to this one small cabinet, UX26, on the right-hand side, you notice that 100% of the events failed with no MAC address. And so New Relic allows us this correlation, this view to say, hey, I know 100% of them failed there because I can just see, hey, 5 ran, 5 failed for the exact same reason. So she calls up the data center and said, hey, so what's going on? Data center technician goes out, and this was a rack of 40 firewalls that had just been pulled from inventory and racked. And unfortunately, they cabled them in reverse. And so obviously it wasn't finding the MAC address because it was trying to hit the wrong interface. So they went in there and they fixed all 40 firewalls, called Dawn and said, hey, you're good to go. So with 5 errors, we found 40 fixes, right?
As opposed to it could have been 40 plus.
Well, yeah, it'd have been like 40 errors, 40 fixes,
Yeah.
1 and 1. And yeah, and so that's the beauty of it is we were able to see that right away, whereas instead of, seeing one, calling the data center, they fix it, seeing one maybe an hour, maybe a day later, having to call the data center, maybe a different data center tech finds it.
Right,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, because that's the thing is if you get the same data center tech 3 times in a row, they might put it all together.
Mhm.
But if you don't, if it's a different shift, if it's weekend or whatever, it might be a while before that trend is discovered. But
Yep.
yeah, right here the trend's right in front of you, right on that dashboard.
Yeah, and so we were able to make real world changes, hardware changes that fixed everything just
Right.
by viewing, hey, there were 5 errors here.
Very nice.
So this next one was really neat. We were able to show the true value of the automation we're providing. It's actually one of my favorite slides. It took me forever to do, and it was fun. But essentially, so our DNS team came to us and said, look, we have a problem. On our cloud side, sometimes we get a scumbag Steve that pops into our data center, spins up a cloud server, gets IP 1234, and then just starts hammering our DNS servers. And DNS, so whenever a server needs to get out to the internet, a domain name, it asks DNS, hey, what's their IP?
Right.
DNS tells them, they're able to resolve it. It resolves, they go to the website. Well, if he's hammering our DNS servers, no one else can get to it. It's a finite resource. He's holding it up from everyone else. So our DNS team sees it. They add a block on our DNS servers and says, don't talk to 1234. That guy's bad news. So he can't get to the internet anymore. He's done what he needs to do. He kills his cloud server. IP 1234 goes back into the stack.
Right.
Then along comes Bad Luck Brian. And he's like, hey, I want to get out to the internet. I'm trying Rackspace for the first time. Let me check it out. Boom, blocked. Because DNS servers don't know him from Scumbag Steve. They just know,
They show that IP address is, yeah.
Yeah, so he calls in, best case scenario, he calls in Rackspace and says, hey guys, I can't get to the internet, what gives? And so they're like, sorry, our bad, it was a dirty IP, we went ahead and cleaned that out for you, you should be good to go. And I say best case scenario because if it's a brand new customer, if you're new to a product and the first thing you use on it, it breaks,
yeah,
your confidence in that thing goes away, so he may not come back, they may just close it down, some of these were DevOps customers that, they're writing it in their code, and it fails, and it may fail like 8 lines down or somewhere else in some other method because this guy failed on the left. So they were actually writing scripts to get around this. Spin up a server, test DNS. If it fails, spin it down, spin it back up.
Wait until you get one that can connect. And then...
Yeah, they can connect. And so our DNS guys were like, look, is there anything you guys can do to help us out with this? And we said, yeah, we can write a process that checks every single IP that goes back into the stack. So once the IP is returned, we know that malicious traffic isn't going on. And then we'll check if it's rate limited, and if it is, we'll remove it, and if not, we'll just opt out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we added that process, and a while back I asked Jason Bratton on the team, I said, hey, so how's it going? And let's see if I have it on here. So if we look at this dashboard that we built, we had 280 rate limits that were cleaned. So when we first started this, it was closer to 4,000 that we cleaned up. And now that we're just kind of in run rate mode, we're cleaning about 280 a week. And I asked him, how's it going? And he's like, dude, you saved my team hours this week. And I'm good with hours. Like, I love saving people time. I'm lazy by nature, so if I can, not do something, it's great. And so I love saving people a ton of time. And so hours is good, but I can't justify my entire team by saving people hours. And so the beauty of New Relic is, yes, I'm logging how many we cleaned, but I'm also logging how many times we ran. And in order to do those 280, we ran 748,000 times in 1 month.
A quarter of a million.
How's that?
A quarter of a million.
Yeah, 3/4 of a million.
3/4, yes.
Don't sell me short.
Yeah.
So yes, but so if we were to do that, if we had a human doing that, I asked, roughly how long would it take? He said about 2 minutes, per IP check. And at 2 minutes, that's 23,470 hours in 1 month. So in order to get that, at 40 hours a week, you'd need 147 people to like sit there and be like, is this IP rate limited? Nope. This one? Oh yeah. Clean. It's boring work, man.
It's it doesn't add any value, and it's yeah.
And so the neat thing is we saved them 147 heads, and so I'm able to say, hey, we saved 147 heads. But even better, my boss loves this slide because I'm able to say, well, let's say you can get one guy for 50,000, and I'm not talking salary. I'm talking like salary and then like overhead, facilities, insurance. It's closer to like 70,000, something like that. I don't know what the number is, but let's just say we can get one for 50. At 147, you're looking at $7.35 million to hire those. And so instead of going to, end of the year's coming up, so everyone's doing their budgets and everyone's trying to justify why they need more, resources or whatever. And so some teams can say, hey, we saved hours over here, but we can actually say with data, we had $7.35 million in cost avoidance, and that was just one process.
One process, right. And this is over a 1 week period, right?
That's 1 month.
Oh, 1
Yeah,
month.
so
That's right. Yeah.
the 7.35 million is the yearly
Okay.
that we
Yeah.
saved. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, and that's the thing is like this isn't something that you cleaned up once and it's gone. I mean, this is still a process that is now automated because you're able to find and fix this process. But yeah, I mean, it's the type of thing where it's not just a one-time savings, an ongoing savings that every month the same amount of roughly the same amount of
Yeah, it's
IPs
going to
being
keep
checked.
doing the job of 147 people every month, and I tried asking for 1%. Just give me 1%. I'll take that. No, I didn't
They
get
didn't.
They didn't fall for it.
I'll keep trying.
So another neat thing we found was that we were able to monitor our ecosystem, and I love this example because we kind of did it by mistake. We started like monitoring all Rackspace IPs.
Okay.
So I mentioned earlier we're doing about 800,000 executions processes per week, and that boils down to, like I said, about 100 every minute. But every single process runs or hits anywhere from about 10 to 200 individual API calls, right? So we're stringing them all together in this automation. So you're looking at somewhere about 10 million API calls every day. And so with all those API calls, I was looking at my dashboards and I saw when they fail. We saw an example of how Dawn was looking at her dashboards and she saw when those failed. And we wanted to see when individual APIs were failing. And we're all looking, I see 10, Marcus sees 10, he's like, oh, everything's fine. But when we start looking at everything together, we can say, hey, this API is failing, 10 for mine, 10 for Marcus, 10 for, Dawn. That's 30 different failures. Right. There's something going on here. And so Marcus, more on our team, had the idea, let's start logging all of our API errors to one dashboard. And so this is our API error dashboard that said, okay, anytime we get an API failure, I want to know what process failed, what action failed in that process, what the API, the full resource and endpoint, what the top level domain was. And we just started looking at all that data, and we found that we were able to see, so on the top left you can see 12 errors. We freak out when that number hits about 20. And so 20 errors out of 10 million API calls in a day, that's 0.00002% sensitivity. And so these systems are owned by different people, right? They're owned by like our support team, our support systems, our billing systems and all that. And they're using APM and server monitoring from New Relic the way it was intended, not the way we're using it. But they're using all those systems, but I guarantee you they're not looking at it that sensitive. They're not looking for like 5 API errors out of 1 million.
Right.
And we are. So we're able to tell them like, hey, something's going on with your API. You may want to take a look. And a couple times we found, usually after a release or something, like, hey, we're noticing that these APIs are occurring on your system, and they'll take a look and they'll be like, oh, and they'll be able to fix it long before first that it affects anyone, and then before their systems even catch it and alert them about it. So that was kind of the neat thing, is we were able to, kind of see all these things by mistake, just be good stewards of Rackspace. Since we're hitting all these APIs, we can tell them, hey, you might take a look at it.
Right, you can kind of take this overall look of everything. Since everything's piping into you, you can see what type of response that API has, and if it's an error, you can log that and kind of start to aggregate it and say, hey, take a look.
Yeah.
I like that. That's very good.
So those were basically the 3 things we could find with New Relic. And so New Relic, like I said, a data visualization tool. You can use it with the agents. You can get so much data from the agents, and you can tell, like, if you're using it with a browser to tell how your website's doing, you can tell where your users are coming from, connection streams, you can see all sorts of stuff. If you're using it with servers, you can see, what's going on in your servers, which systems are acting up more than others. But if you start using it with the custom events API, you can expand out, I'd say exponentially, all the stuff you can do with New Relic, because then what if you're trying to monitor data that you can't get from servers or can't get from browser? You can start throwing that data up through the events API. Yep. And that's essentially what we've been doing.
Well, great. That's really good. Thank you for coming in and sharing it. I know that Drew and I had a chance to talk with you for a few minutes in San Francisco and kind of got a preview of it. And then we had a chance to watch the actual presentation, and it's great. I mean, just the fact that you're able to find all of these processes and improve the processes. I think that's great. I think that more organizations should take advantage of these opportunities and find places for efficiency. I love the quote that you mentioned earlier. It said that you drive that automation. You create that automation that allows us to be fanatical, and we really appreciate that. I mean, that's the way that you're fanatically supporting Rackers, and we're doing it as well. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it was just very, very interesting. Drew, do you have any comments or questions on that? We've kind of had you muted out there this whole time.
No, I'd much rather sit back and listen and make sure that the story of what's actually been done here is fully realized. The things that I'd like to talk about a little bit more is around, because you're able to do custom events and flesh that out. I think you mentioned this pretty early on, Robert, about the intent behind these custom events was probably to color and flesh out a little bit the existing content that's being pulled up. But when you can create a custom event, the whole thing is color. There's not some piece that you're polishing a little bit. You're creating everything, and a lot of what buzz you'll hear in the business world is making data-driven decisions. If you can take this approach and figure out what kind of data you could theoretically capture and then start doing so, your ability to make data-driven decisions goes from being kind of veiled pieces of the data you have to a nearly limitless number of data points. And I think it's really interesting what you shared in that middle example of, I built automation and I wanted to know what impact that automation was having, and through this type of monitoring, I'm able to throw the data that I'm gathering through executing on this automation. I'm able to track it and log it in a way that I can see a massive impact of this process that just runs. It's a thing. I built it. It runs. It does its job. That's work that no longer has to be a person's reactive work. But now you're able to take that story, a narrative of, we don't have to have somebody go in and clear those IPs when a customer calls in. You don't have to tell that narrative just as a narrative. You get to put it and say, the only way to solve this problem with humans would have been this kind of expense, and now we don't have to do that.
Yeah, exactly. That was
which is incredible. That gives you
people wouldn't, we wouldn't spend, 7.35 million. I mean, it's an important issue, but we would be like, okay, let's find some other way around it. And with automation, it was just, the cheapest and fastest way around it, and it happened to be also the best solution for it. And we can show that with the data.
Yeah. And there's a lot of times when I think businesses generally have an idea that it's going to be good to take a step in a certain direction. Like we need to automate more things. We need to push code out more often. We need to move to CI/CD. We need to whatever their hunch is. That step one in that direction may be pretty low risk, but it's harder to quantify. Like, yeah, that was a really valuable step. We need to take another one. Usually, it's a narrative early on, and if you can structure around it the data analytics and data gathering, you can make a really strong point that says, I've been preaching automation for years. You finally let me automate this one little thing. Look at the impact that it had. It's not just everybody who got impacted by it is now smiling a little bit more or will give me a pat on the back. This is the actual factual savings from time perspective, from maybe a cost perspective, from any number of things. This is the value that we have, and this is why I think we should take another step that direction. And that data-driven decision-making having that data gives you the ammunition to say, we need to take another step. We need to continue this direction. We need to do all of these things. And here we are in December. People are kind of shutting down for the year. Things are pretty quiet. Most of the heavy lifting and the work has been done. But in January, budget is up for grabs. And so a lot of people want to be able to make their voice heard. Look, this is why I think budget needs to go this direction. And one of the key points that you also brought up throughout this was the speed at which you're able to capture and start parsing data. And so you can start building out your dashboards now that can defend your point of view. I want our company to get better at X. I want our company to start automating Y. I want, this direction to be championed. You can start building out a dashboard today that you can bring into those budget meetings in January that's got a bunch of data that you'll be able to massage and manipulate with the questions that get peppered at you. Okay, yeah, well, that's great, but what does that have to do with our East Coast business versus our West Coast business? Well,
yeah,
yes.
so one of the neat things I hadn't mentioned was that, so yes, we're using it with our automation process, our API workflow, and some people out there may be, well, it's not applicable to me because I don't have an API workflow engine, but we actually have done, sometimes you have an Excel spreadsheet, and as a data analyst, I did everything in Excel. I usually had a SQL backend, and then you give it to someone with a Mac, like you, and it doesn't run on the back end. Like now all my integrated SQL queries don't run and refresh, and so it's not a a cross-platform product. What we've done is we have some huge SQL spreadsheets that we said, or SQL Excel spreadsheets that we go to our data analyst. He has this Python script and just say, hey, chunk this up to New Relic. And so we've taken this Excel spreadsheet and row by row sent that into New Relic, and then we have this Insights dashboard specifically for that Excel spreadsheet. And it's not it's not live updating because we're not sending more data in that case. But we'd have this spreadsheet that then you can go into like your budgeting meeting or whatever with your team's data, and you can start clicking around and use New Relic's kind of how it reconfigures the entire dashboard and data sets based on that. It's basically like pivot tables on steroids, if you could show it, and visualization and stuff like that. So it's definitely so much more powerful. There's so many ways to use that custom events API.
So I'm kind of curious what other audiences you've put the visualization that Insights provides in front of, people who wouldn't normally get to play data analyst. Who have you put that in front of, and what results has that brought about?
That's a good question. We've had quite a few. So I'd say one of the biggest success stories was so our network security department. They were, swamped. Those guys, I commend them. They come in day to day to like huge ticket queues, and they hammer it out as quickly as possible. And they go home, and the ticket queues are still huge because they've just been doing everything they can. And so one of the things we did, they had this report called the latency report that just says, hey, which are the tickets that are the oldest? Let's work on those. And they were like, hey, can you automate this? And we're like, well, let's start throwing this into New Relic. So we started throwing in these tickets into New Relic Insights, and we built a dashboard for them. And they have it up in their section. If you go to network security, you can see a New Relic dashboard on TVs in their section. And one of the things they noticed was, we did a report called Tickets Incoming and Outgoing. Probably had a better name than that, but that's what it showed. And you see this spike when tickets come in but don't come out. And so we're like, oh, you have, you're staffed here when your ticket, output is greater than your input, but here your ticket input is way higher than what's going out. You need to staff here instead. And so they actually changed it, and they reduced it. They reduced their workload, some ridiculous number, like 50% or something like that, just by seeing the data visually, realizing that they were staffed incorrectly, and then just changing, and let's move these heads here, let's get these shifters instead of this one, and it had a real world impact. Like it dropped their ticket queues. Now teams 24/7 we're seeing the benefit, because now that we don't have this huge ugly spike here, it lowers everyone else's ticket queues. And that was one of the, I'd say, the biggest impact. One of the biggest impacts we had was with that team.
Yeah, you're putting the big data potential that everyone theorizes about and touts, but hasn't felt impact them. You're putting that big data promise in front of people who probably want access to what big data could deliver with, just log it all and we'll figure out what to do with it later. Once you log it all and you start putting it into visual terms, and you put the ability to parse that data in the hands of a wide variety of disciplines. A manager and an HR group don't usually think of leveraging big data. Yep. But the value of being able to visualize all the data points starts becoming really clear when a manager can say, well, for the time being, I need to shift my staffing. But it also looks like one extra head, well placed, can have a huge benefit to us, and I know exactly where to put it. I can justify to HR that I need one head, and I need it right here. Yep. So let's start marching that direction, and we can really see see that additional headcount go to the absolute best use because of timing. And none of that information would have been as clear without capturing all the data and visualizing it well and putting it in the hands of those people. I think that's the coolest part of your use case was let's just start tracking stuff and see what happens. And then there's this trickle down effect of 3 very different results from the idea that it's important that we find out what data is out there, and then we'll start asking it questions as they come up. But if we capture it all, then most of the questions that come up we can have answers for. And if we come up with a question we don't have an answer for, it's just a matter of fleshing out what data we're capturing a little bit further. What was your process? I think that might be a good place to go. What was the process in finding out what data you had missed? Is there a rule of thumb of like dark corners everyone should shine their flashlight, or
so that actually grew there. I did say log everything, right? But not all processes have everything. Sometimes you're dealing with a device, but you're not logging, what cabinet, what data center it's in, because it's not pertinent to the process. And we've kind of grown to the point where, okay, we know we have processes that span everywhere from provisioning to decommissioning. Let's start adding these to the process. Even though it's not used in the process, it'll fall out the back end into New Relic, and then we can use this, later on to see a lot more. So there have been data sets that not only are we logging everything in the process, but then we're actually pumping more into the process that we need just so we'll have it in logging. And usually, the key ones are, account, device, data center. Those are kind of the main ones because you want to know what account is being impacted by these things, what devices are being impacted. And then sometimes we can even go down into like data center cabinet, data center row, what switches are they connected to. And we actually have a dashboard that we built out for incident management that we're trying to flesh out that, hey, this thing broke, check it out. I now know everything that's affected because I know which which aggregate router, which switch is connected to, which cabinets are being affected, which customers are within those cabinets, just because we have all that data available. And so, yeah, it's just usually what happens is we'll have something, someone will see it and be like, oh, like, what if, and that's the one question is what if.
They get that look in their eyes and you know what's going to come next.
And so you'd be like, I don't know, what if? Let's find out.
Yeah.
So we just start throwing that data in there, and then you notice like, oh, the what if is really awesome. So.
No, that's great. The ability to kind of see that. You don't know what you're going to find. You don't know what's going to be awesome, and then you're able to go through and because you have that, because you've taken your advice and thrown everything at it, you can go back through and start to kind of pull those down and start to use them again. So that's great to see. I'm kind of curious. We kind of kicked off, and we mentioned it a couple of times, but we were all actually at the New Relic FutureStack conference a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to kind of get your impressions on that and see. I know that you're able to not just attend your own talk, obviously, but attend a few of the others. Was there anything that really stuck out at you that was interesting that you want to incorporate or think that would be beneficial down the road?
So. Well, I like the fact that I was focusing on insights. So I did get a couple questions after the talk about like, oh, well, how would you use the servers and APM? And to be honest, I've never used them. I don't know. So those kind of never really hit me. But I know that now, like on the first keynote, they said they're giving insights now free. So everybody has it. If you're using New Relic for anything, you have free insights, and you can basically you have like 8 days of data. So essentially, all of your APM data, all of your browser data will be in Insights, and you'll be able to see it for, you got an 8-day retention, and so you'll be able to see what the last week looked like.
Okay.
That was really huge, especially because like people were then looking at my talk and saying, oh, well, what is Insights? Let's find out, and they're going straight from what is Insights into, hey, let's use it in this, duct tape and baling wire manner to try to get even more meaningful insights.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and so just to reiterate here, you say there's 8 days of data retention, and so that's kind of the way that they price out this product, right?
Right.
So if you want to be able to go back and look at a month, a quarter, a year's worth of data, you got to pay additional for that data retention.
Right, to
storage.
extend the retention.
Right.
Other than that, after 8 days,
it's like a rolling
it
8
just
days. So,
falls out.
Yeah. Well, no, that's good. That's good for finding. I would think that you'd be able to find a lot of immediate, immediate trends, and take a look back at things that are happening in relatively real time. But then also you can find out, hey, this might be worth retaining data on this process for 6 months or something like that to look at the historical trends and find out. Yeah. So that's great.
So another neat thing is they rolled out, I believe it's Data Explorer or something like that. So I didn't mention, I used to be a data analyst. I already said that, but I wrote SQL all the time. NERCL is really easy. My entire team that I was writing SQL queries for is writing NERCL. Like it's simple enough. They're not SQL people. But I mean, once you read they have like they have a page that's really good on just NERCL. Once you read that, I mean, it's really easy to learn. But even then, if you didn't want to learn that, or if you wanted to learn a different way, they have that Data Explorer that you can just tell, I want to go from this source, and then I want to view these things and these things, and it actually builds out. It'll build out the NERCL for you. So you can click around, it'll build your dashboard, and then at the top it'll show you what the NERCL statement is that will build that dashboard for you.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so it's really neat for people that don't know SQL, and they can just jump right in and still build meaningful dashboards without having to know NERCL right off the bat or even read any documentation.
So it's the type of thing that you could help set up on the back end, send this data to the New Relic database, and then hand it off to somebody else who can then say, well, for my portion of the business, I need these 5 different facets, and then for somebody else's portion, they can build their own dashboards. And if you don't have the staff to do all of this, proactively, you can go through and just kind of hand it off to them and have them. Because NERCL's pretty easy to figure out, they can build their own dashboards.
Yeah, we've done that for a lot of our customers.
That's great.
We just said, hey, here's access. You find out what you guys want to know, and we give them it's like 5-minute kind of brief on NERCL, and they go out and we look at their dashboards, and it's really cool what they've built. Just on a 5-minute
because they know that
tutorial.
business. Yeah,
Exactly.
and to be clear here, when you say your customers, you're talking about Rackspace internal. Right.
My customers are Rackspace.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So no, so that's good. So I mean, yeah, because you would have to spend weeks at a time probably sitting directly with them, with your customers, with the Rackers that you're working with, to figure out what's important to them and how displaying that data is important to them. But because they know it so well, because NERCL is so easy to figure out, they're able to put these together in a relatively fast fashion. That's great.
And without us, that's the best part is I'm not getting hit by 28 customers all wanting a new data set at the same time.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the I don't know, 3 different examples that you had right there, and then the 4th and 5th ones that you talked about afterwards. Like that's the 5 projects in a year is a pretty good year for a lot of for a lot of companies, and being able to find all these things. Then okay, here we figured it out. You guys can play with the dashboards however you want. We're on to the next thing.
So I'm kind of curious about what the spin up versus like steady state has been. Once you began building dashboards and collecting data, how have you seen much of a compounding value? I don't know how to necessarily put it. So you start capturing data. How much of that data begins to be valuable down the road, and how much new data do you have to go in and capture? I know you've built a bunch of dashboards, but has the amount of work it's taken to build a new thing or to provide someone with new insight trailed off? Do you expect it to at some point plateau and just be massaging the already existing data? Or do you think you haven't hit that because people are just interested in getting more? What do you think that workload is going to do from a volume standpoint?
So we have found it's getting a lot easier, right? So now we have a standard. When you build a process, you will put New Relic in there and dump all your data to New Relic. So that's
is that a learning curve thing? Is that something that has because of the learning curve, or just because
I think it was more
it's been built into a process?
Yeah, so when we write the processes, we just weren't comfortable with. I'd started using it from the get-go, but some of the other process engineers weren't entirely comfortable with it. So we built some standard actions that we could just drag and drop and then just put what you want to log into there. And it kind of, for them, it became easier over time. They became more comfortable with it. They saw the value it was bringing. And then on the, is it valuable side, or, you know, where are we getting the payoff? So some of the dashboards, like the API error one, is an aggregate of all processes, but most of them, we're just logging this process and this process. And so the thing about automation is when we build the automation, people are so happy. Oh, thank you. You've saved me so much time. You know, we love you. A month down the line, they don't know your name. That's just, that problem's taken care of a long time ago. It's fine until automation breaks, and then they know exactly who you are, and they're at your desk, you know, yelling at you. It's like the power company. I know nothing about the power company. When my lights go off, I'm on the phone with them, and I'm angry, you know. So one of the neat things about building these dashboards is we build them, we give them to our customers, and it's a constant reminder. Hey, saved you 147 heads. Hey, by the way, those 147 heads are still being saved, you know. And so it's a constant reminder of the things automation is doing for them. And it kind of keeps it front of mind for a lot of people. And sometimes it's not just a reminder like, hey, we're doing stuff for you, our team is here. It's also allows them to say, hey, I can now correlate, you know, like with the DNS one, what account is doing this? Maybe there's one specific account that is constantly hammering our DNS. They can see those, you know, they can put those analytics together. So it's kind of a twofer. It gives them the ability to see analytics of the world that they care about, while also reminding them that, you know, our team is awesome.
That's great. That's good. Well, hey,
always good to remind.
It is, and it's good to be the one that they remember fondly, as opposed to the one that
as opposed to when it breaks.
Breaking out the pitchforks and torches. Great. No, thank you, Robert, for joining us. I really appreciate that. It was great to have you come out and spend a little bit of time with us. I really appreciate that, and all the I'm just going to say it, all the insights that you provided on this one. You got to say it, I guess. But
it's the best word.
It is.
They nailed it on the head.
Yeah, they did. No, but thank you so much. Just want to remember that anybody that is that is a Rackspace customer that's watching this, we do have a relationship with New Relic that allows you to start exploring New Relic with your Rackspace account. NewRelic.com/Rackspace will get you signed up, and like Robert mentioned, 8 days worth of retention on Insights. So absolutely a good idea to get started with that as soon as possible. So go ahead and check that out. See if that works for you. See which processes you can dive into a little bit deeper and find ways to improve your business. So again, Robert, thank you very much for joining us. Drew, thanks for helping out as well. Appreciate your I'm not going to say insights this time. You have great questions that help us to drive the conversation. So always appreciate that. Thanks to Tyler, who's running things behind the scenes. And on that note, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Just remind you that we do this every Thursday at 1 p.m. We've got 2 more shows this year, and then we're going to take a break as we end up the year. So we've got 2 shows on big data coming up is what we've got scheduled right now. So check back next week as we dive deeper into big data. And on that note, thanks for watching, everybody. See you next week.